We arrived at our decision over a nice meal of Thai food. We were going to break up. We both wanted different things, and that was fine. I was fine. I was actually more than fine, because it wasn't her I was going to miss. It was the future I thought I was going to have with her. I went to great lengths to make our relationship the focal point of my life, so much so that when we broke up, I had nothing left of my own except the rough road ahead of winning back all my friends and figuring out who I was now. But 34 days later, when I found out she'd been cheating on me for God knows how long, this self-reflection I'd begun to embrace turned into a solid amount of depression. When I realized that our breakup was a mutual decision between 3 people, I locked myself into a new apartment and opened up my iTunes. Yes, I do agree to these terms and services. Now let's get drunk. After a couple of weeks, I emerged with a flowing beard and a whole new understanding of Neil Young's music. I also had a plan. I needed to get the fuck out of Dodge. Destination, Ohio. And my dad's house in a small town called Bellefontaine. It's an hour outside of Columbus and 3,000 miles from anything that resembled my life. My parents had divorced when I was 3, and thank God my mom chose to leave Ohio in favor of the sunny West Coast, which was 3,000 miles from anything that resembled her life. Divorce meant visiting beautiful Bellefontaine every summer for 14 years. If you're thinking to yourself, that house looks like it's probably across the street from a cemetery, you're right. Although my dad let me watch MTV, I hated every day I spent there. It was beyond boring. Unless I enjoyed meth or getting girls pregnant, there really wasn't a lot for a 13-year-old to do. But as I got older, the music did indeed get louder, the kids did seem to get less respectful, and now at the age of 27, a week spent in boring old Bellefontaine sounded like heaven. The nearest neighbor was a mile away, there were no Starbucks, and my cell phone didn't work within county limits. It's like once you passed the sign that read, "Now entering Bellefontaine," God reached down, zapped my phone, and said, "Please stop with the status updates. No one cares what you think about deer." This was my first trip back to Ohio in 10 years, and since I had a more grown-up view on life, I decided to give it a new look. And you know what? It's a pretty great place. Everyone knows everyone. The shops are small and owned by families. Nothing's been rebuilt since 1971, and it's chock full of history. Did you know that Bellefontaine has the first concrete road in America? It's true. Its courthouse is located on the tribal grounds of Blue Jacket and Tecumseh, who both played pivotal roles in the Northwest Indian War in forming the Seven Nations Army. Not just a clever White Stripes song. My dad had a trip planned with his wife to visit her family in Michigan, and that couldn't be canceled, so they left me the house and the keys to his F-150, and they took off. His internet was dial-up, and ladder fail was taking forever to load on YouTube, so I decided I would experience my first small-town Midwest bar. Within an hour, I got asked to fight twice for wearing this hat. So I left. When I got back, I had an email from my friend Matt, who was staying in New York for a month. He told me half-jokingly that if I was bored in Ohio, I should drive to New York and we could hang out. Since it was either that or getting pummeled for apparently looking like a faggot newsie, I gassed up the F-150, printed a map, and started the 12-hour drive. I got to the end of my dad's driveway. Look at that asshole. I got to the end of my dad's driveway, and I realized I was all by myself, a concept that had been foreign to me for the past 3 years. Up until a couple months ago, if I wanted to go anywhere, I had a constant companion, and this companion had her own ideas, her own plans and schedules. If I wanted to avoid a fight, I would just keep my mouth shut and do whatever she said. This was no longer the case. My ex was no longer allowed to tell me what to do, and for the first time since our breakup, I felt lost. Was I really about to drive to New York? I sat at the end of the driveway for a good 15 minutes trying to decide if this was something I was ready to handle, on my own. And at that exact moment, this song came on my iPod Shuffle.
Autumn in New York.
Are you fucking kidding me, Billie Holiday? Are you serious?
17.
I mean, autumn was a week away, but goddamn it, this was still a good enough sign for me to take off. But iPod, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to stop and see everything I think is interesting enough to stop for. I'm going to listen to music louder than ever before. I'll never roll up my window to turn on the AC. And above all else, I will try my hardest to learn nothing from this experience. This trip was for me, to be me, and do everything I could to remember who me was. My first unplanned stop came in Ashland, Ohio. About 20 miles past Youngstown on the 33 East, I saw a sign for something called Grandpa's Village. I must see what this is.
It's autumn.
Grandpa's Village was not a large water park filled with grandpas like my mind had anticipated. It was actually a small hotel just off the freeway. As you pull into the parking lot, music blares through speakers placed all over the property. There's Sinatra, Dean Martin, Harry James, Artie Shaw, and if this ain't heaven, I don't know what is. Once I parked, I saw another sign full of even more hope, Grandpa's Cheese Barn. I was so excited, I actually did that little half run people do when they're trying to cross the street so you can turn right. This was exactly the kind of place my ex would have loved to talk a lot of shit about. That was inside. In all honesty, so would I, but there was no one to quip with, so my jokes just lay dormant. The Cheese Barn portion of the shop was upstairs. Now, what I saw upstairs was at the very least incredible. It was like Willy Wonka's factory, but instead of Oompa Loompas, there were little old ladies scurrying about preparing and selling lots and lots of cheese. If my ex was here, she would have audibly laughed and found a way to belittle them, but as I walked around, my own urge to crack wise started to fade. I never took a photo of this place, partly because I felt like this was one of those tribes located in remote parts of the globe where if I might steal their souls by my camera flash. But mainly, I couldn't take a picture because something in me changed, and I realized I wasn't enjoying their existence ironically. I was just enjoying it. Every one of these old cheese ladies had something that I didn't, and I was jealous of it. And that could never be captured in a photograph. What they had exactly I didn't know, but I could feel it. You know, when you can look in someone's eyes and see that they clearly know something you don't. Well, just imagine that same scenario, just now surrounded by little old women and delicious cheese. I hopped back in my truck, took a bite of cheese, and realized two things. One, this Gouda is loaded with metaphor. And two, my ex was a bitch. Blasting Neil Young's Silver and Gold, I took the 70 East and headed into Pennsylvania. Living in San Diego, we forget that there are actually 4 seasons on Earth, not just summer with 5 days of rain. Driving down the 70 through Pennsylvania, I felt like I was riding through the dictionary definition of the word autumn, like I was trapped in a Thomas Kincaid painting, even though that dude's kind of an asshole and his painting's overpriced. My mom, forget it. My goal was to reach New York by 9 p.m. so I could meet up with Matt for a dinner and drinks. Taking this particular route into New York, you have to go through the New Jersey Turnpike. Google Maps will tell you this is a merge. Life will tell you this is the apocalypse. Once you exit this turnpike, you are literally in the middle of New York City. And I needed to get to Brooklyn. The map's directions seem simple enough. A few lefts, a couple rights, and bam, Brooklyn. However, when you get into New York City, 2 things become abundantly clear. 1, keeping street signs legible and or locatable is not really a priority. And 2, these streets were made in 1920, long before the invention of the F-150. My truck was not meant for these roads, and at every single turn or stoplight, every driver in New York reminded me of that. I couldn't get over. I couldn't see anything. I had no idea where I was going, and I was constantly, and I really do mean constantly, honked at, yelled at, and cut off every 5 feet. I don't think I've ever been to Manhattan or Soho and thought, you know what I want to do here? Drive. After turning in circles for almost 30 minutes, I had a full-blown panic attack. I swerved off to a street with no traffic, and I began to catch my breath. I found solace in the fact that the one thing that kept me, that would have made this all so much worse, I had broken up with last month. Within seconds, someone honked, called me an asshole, and drove off. I restarted the truck and convinced myself it's time to go back to Ohio. Luckily, as I turned the corner, I saw a sign that read Brooklyn with an arrow pointing right. Billie Holiday was still looking out for me. I was only going to be in New York for about 24 hours, so I made it a point to do as much as I could as quickly as possible. In the morning, my friend Matt and I went to Little Italy for breakfast. When we left the restaurant, we literally ran into Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr. I was going to ask for a photo, but he was holding a baby, and it all seemed a little too Morrissey, so I didn't do it. We walked through Central Park. Beautiful. We saw David Blaine holding his breath or some shit. He's up there somewhere. We went to a taping of The Late Show with David Letterman, then headed to a Broadway comedy called Boeing Boeing. The show was over. I headed back to Brooklyn and began the drive back to Ohio. Well, first, I got donuts. The only one holding donuts was me. While driving over the Brooklyn Bridge, looking at the cloudy skyline, I couldn't figure out why I was leaving. What was I going back to? For the first time in my life, I was free from the care of my mother, past the decade of piggybacking serious relationships, and I was totally alone. But this wasn't like the solitude I'd experienced before at the end of my dad's driveway. This was different. It was deeper. It was real. Whatever was going on made me feel simultaneously more depressed and more free than I'd ever felt. So much so that I felt like I could drive my truck off the Brooklyn Bridge and fly into the sky like at the end of Grease. I stopped at a gas station in New Jersey to get gas and not only digest my donuts, but also the emotions I was now burying down deep inside with sprinkles and Boston cream. I looked at the time, 1 a.m. I looked at the map and decided to drive as far west as I could before falling asleep. 2 hours later, I pulled off the freeway and drove to a dead end of a random street. I decided to set up camp in the cab of the F-150. Sure, it was a little tight, but I was on my own now. No need to fit two. When I woke up, smoke was covering the entire truck. Scared out of my mind, I jumped out and noticed that it was just a thick fog rolling down the road. The dead end I had parked at seemed to double as the entrance to a giant park. Needing a bathroom, I headed into the fog, hoping to find a tree or a trash can or something. The fog finally cleared, and I had discovered that the city I spent the night in was Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and I had parked directly behind the stadium where they hold the Little League World Series. I didn't believe my eyes. I'm a huge baseball fan, and I watch the Little League World Series every year, and I didn't know how this could possibly happen. Excited, I swung around to the front of the stadium complex to find the Little League World Series Museum. I wanted to run in and see several pictures of a young, fat Sean Burroughs when he was at his happiest, but admission was $20, so I just asked to use the bathroom, and I left. I began to walk around the complex itself. It was a bit overwhelming to walk in the same footsteps as thousands of kids who had experienced more success at the age of 11 and 12 than I might ever in my entire life. Over 90% of these kids will never reach the level of professional baseball, but that's never mattered to them. At 12, they reach the highest level they will statistically ever reach, but will presumably live another 50 years. When I got back in the truck, I turned on a little John Fogerty and stared out the window. I was never good at baseball, at any age, at any level, but I would have traded everything up until that point in my life to have one good year followed by 50 years that never quite felt the same. At about an hour down the road, I saw a street sign that would once again send me off the beaten path. Punxsutawney, 28 miles. I was on my way to see if Phil felt lucky. Upon entering Punxsutawney, I realized that this is not where they filmed Groundhog Day. In fact, that film was made in Illinois, and I could only guess that decision was made because the real Punxsutawney is kind of a shithole. I grabbed lunch, and I took it to the real Gobbler's Knob. It's a real place. Before I headed out, I stopped at the Groundhog Zoo, which was actually just a small corner of the local library. I walked over, and there he was, Phil, the groundhog. No one was there, as I'm sure the people of Punxsutawney feel about Phil the way I feel about the beach. But to me, this was amazing, so I took a photo. Some guy walked by and said, "Hey, I've never seen him do that before." I said, "Do what?" And he replied, "Stand up for somebody. You must be something special." He winked and walked off. My first thought was to yell, "Fuck you!" But in truth, this random guy's compliment, which he probably says to everyone like he's the fucking mayor or something, meant more to me than anything anyone had ever said to me ever. I couldn't control a relationship. I might not be able to control my life, but I could control Phil. And hot damn, that was something to build on. There's a stretch of the 70 West where the forest wall breaks free for about 10 miles, and the freeway just runs adjacent to a railroad. It's actually a beautiful sight, and as I drove by, a passenger train appeared right at the exact same moment that I was driving by, and this song started on my shuffle.
Sit on a train, reading a book, same damn planet every time I look. Try to relax and slow my heartbeat.
What the fuck was going on? The lyrics, the train, everything was happening all at the exact same time. The universe came together for what? For me? Was it random? What was going on? Whatever was happening was just too much for my brain and my body to process, and the only reaction I could muster was to cry. I mean, bawl. Like some woman watching The Notebook. What's wrong with me? Why did she cheat? Why did I care? I didn't want to be with her anyway, so why am I using my feelings for her as an excuse to deal with what the real problem is? I not only had nothing to go back to, I had nothing to go towards. So fuck you, song, and fuck you, train, and fuck David Blaine. Will someone just tell me what the fuck I'm supposed to do? When I finally got back to Ohio, I tried to explain everything about my trip to my dad. Phil, New York, the train, Little League World Series, everything. His reply to all that had happened was the following.
What's wrong?
Oh, hey.
Nothing.
Where did you sing the song?
Nothing's wrong. Yeah.
You can turn it down.
But you're sad about something.
His reply to the following was, sounds like
So
fun.
tell me
Want to get some chicken
what I
wings?
don't know. I can't tell you.
We went to the local wingery named Wingers, and we found a table amongst the other locals. A good amount of the patrons all came over and said hello to my dad. He engaged all of them in small talk, introduced me to those whom I've never met, and joked with how much I'd grown to those who I had. It's actually a bit thrilling to see how proud your father is of you when he's only been a part of 20% of your life. Some old co-workers of my dad gave us some beers, and we decided to play a little video trivia. Although my dad is extremely terrible at retaining any kind of information, making him quite possibly the worst trivia player of all time, he seemed to be enjoying himself. He was happy, and his face now looked familiar, and I again was jealous. It was that same look those old cheese ladies had, and I started to feel the same way I'd felt walking through the Little League complex and staring down at the groundhog. I couldn't take my eyes off my dad. It wasn't happiness beaming through his grin, it was something else. He was relaxed, he was enjoying himself. It was contentment. He really did have my dad didn't really have an amazing life. He just had a life. And he didn't want anything else. He just wanted more life. Sure, he'd made a ton of mistakes in his past, paid for some, got away with others, but now he's just a guy eating wings and badly losing at trivia to his son. It was true. I had nothing to go back to, and as I had learned, I had nothing to go towards. But for the first time, I could see how completely satisfying that really was. Thanks.
Dallas McLaughlin.